My parents asked me to help them pay off my sister's 180 debt after I cut ties with them for not pursuing medicine like she did, but I helped them by doubling the debt without giving a single dollar. I was born into a family where no one had ever gone to college, but my parents always believed education was the only way out of poverty. From a young age, they carved out a single path for me. I would become a doctor. Not just any doctor, a surgeon. A decision I was never consulted on. My dad, Richard, had a habit of reading anatomy books and quizzing me with medical questions since I was 8. My mom, Linda, spent every penny she could to enroll me in advanced math classes and science camps. My childhood was a pressure cooker, where every personal dream was crushed under relentless expectations. Ironically, I had a gift for art. By the time I was 10, I could draw lifelike portraits that made strangers stop and stare. When I brought them home, my dad would glance at them and say, "Not bad, but don't forget you have a chemistry test tomorrow." My mom would stick a few on the fridge but never really looked at them like the way I hoped she would. In 11th grade, my art teacher told me I had real talent and should consider applying to art school. She even offered to help me build a portfolio and walk me through the application process. That night, I came home for dinner full of nervous excitement and told my parents about the opportunity. After what felt like a century of silence, my dad put down his fork, looked me straight in the eye, and said art was a hobby, not a career. My mom didn't say much, just reminded me that I had already been accepted into a prestigious pre-med program at the state university, and that was final. No one asked me what I actually wanted. They just repeated like a command. "We're not throwing your future away on some silly paintings." My sister Jessica was the total opposite. She genuinely loved medicine, entered science fairs, and won them 3 years in a row. My parents never hesitated to brag about her to everyone, relatives, friends, neighbors, bursting with pride. "She's going to be the doctor in the family." Meanwhile, I became the shadow next to her. Every one of Jessica's achievements was a reminder that I wasn't enough. I wasn't jealous of her. I was jealous of the way my parents looked at her, a look I never got. By junior year of college, I began to fall apart. I was taking 3 brutal classes at once: organic chemistry, anatomy, and biophysics. I was so exhausted I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and passed out twice in the library in a single week. My roommate got genuinely worried, and that's when it hit me. If I kept going like this, I might die before I ever graduated. I called home, hoping for understanding. I told my mom I needed to take a semester off to think, to figure out if I was even on the right path. Before I could finish, she handed the phone to my dad. He immediately asked, "Are you on drugs?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and said, "No, I just think I need to consider other options. Maybe art." I told them I had been accepted into 3 different art programs. Silence. Then my mom said this wasn't something we could discuss over the phone, and that I should come home that weekend. I thought they wanted to have a serious conversation, but when I got there, they simply sat me down and gave me an ultimatum. If I didn't go back to pre-med, they would cut off all financial support, tuition, car insurance, health insurance, everything. They also said they wouldn't speak to me until I came to my senses. I tried to explain that I had partial scholarships, that I would work to cover the rest. I showed them my portfolio, my acceptance letters, everything. My dad flipped through the papers, then pushed them back without saying a word. My mom said one sentence I'll never forget: "You're throwing your future away over some scribbles?" I walked out that day and never looked back. I had about 3,000 saved from summer jobs. Not much, but enough to start over. The following week, I officially withdrew from the pre-med program and transferred to an art school with a partial scholarship. I haven't spoken to my parents since that weekend. No calls, no texts, nothing, as if I never existed. I didn't reach out either, not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. My new life wasn't easy. I studied, worked part-time jobs, and struggled to pay rent and tuition, but I felt alive. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. After graduating, I freelanced for a while before landing a job at a major media company. I worked hard and kept learning. Last year, I was promoted to creative director with a 75,000 salary. Not a doctor's income, but that's okay. I get to do what I love, and no one controls my life anymore. It's the life I chose for myself. As for Jessica, we kept in touch on social media for the first few years. She'd send me pictures from the lab and updates about her med school applications. I'd send back photos of the projects I was working on, designs I was proud of. Eventually, we talked less and less. When I graduated from art school, Jessica got accepted into med school. I saw photos of our parents throwing her a big party on Facebook. 2 weeks ago, My parents unexpectedly showed up at my apartment door. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. They said they had made mistakes and needed to talk. They didn't come inside, just stood out in the hallway, saying they'd done a lot of thinking over the years. They said they should have supported me from the beginning when I chose to pursue art. But then my dad's tone shifted, and he said the family was going through some difficulties. I frowned and asked what exactly that meant. My mom looked at my dad, then at me, her voice slightly trembling as she brought up Jessica. She said Jessica was having a few problems in med school, but nothing serious, just academic pressure. I started to feel like something was off. After 6 years of no contact, they suddenly reappeared and said all the right things, it felt. Rehearsed. I asked them how they even knew my address. My dad bluntly said they had hired someone to find it. That sentence gave me chills, not out of anger, but because I realized they really were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. The whole conversation lasted less than 20 minutes, and then they asked if I could have dinner with them over the weekend. I told them I needed time to think. After they left, I called my cousin Daniel, who used to be close to Jessica. I asked if he knew what was really going on with her. Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. Jessica wasn't just having a few problems. She had been expelled from med school for cheating on her final exam. Not only that, but she had been reported to the medical board, meaning she would never be allowed to study medicine again. After the fallout, Jessica moved back in with our parents and hadn't left her room in 3 months. She did nothing but sleep until noon and play video games all day. Daniel said she was showing signs of severe depression, and our parents were completely falling apart. I was stunned. I understood how Jessica felt. I had almost fallen into that same abyss. The only difference was, I turned away in time. She had been crushed by the very expectations I escaped. Daniel said our parents were desperate now that the reputation they had built for so long had collapsed. They used to brag to everyone about having a daughter who would be a doctor. Now they had no idea what to say when she was lying at home. No degree, no direction. That's when it hit me. They weren't here because they missed me. They came because I was the only successful one left. In their eyes, I had never been the worthy child, until Jessica failed. I was the backup plan. I couldn't help the bitterness rising inside me. For years, they looked down on my choices, cut me off completely just because I didn't study medicine. And now, when the child they bet everything on had failed, they came crawling back as if I owed them something. I didn't want to face it right away, so I didn't call them back. But 3 days later, they showed up at my office. My mom looked around, visibly surprised, and said, "We didn't expect you to be doing this well." My dad asked how much I made and whether I owned my apartment. I stayed calm, keeping the desk between us, and asked directly, "What do you want?" My dad said they were hoping I'd call after our last meeting, and since I didn't, they thought they'd try one more time. My mom pulled out her phone and quietly showed me a picture of Jessica lying in bed, her eyes empty. Then my dad changed the subject and said they needed financial help. I frowned. "You mean, you're asking me to help?" My dad's eyes widened. "Well, isn't success meant to be shared with family?" He said Jessica was carrying 180,000 in student loan debt. Even though she didn't graduate, she still had to repay every cent. I shook my head and told them plainly I wasn't going to pay off Jessica's debt. But then they started talking about how much they'd sacrificed to raise me, saying they couldn't walk away from this empty-handed. I just looked at them without saying anything, not because I lacked arguments, but because the whole thing was so absurd. The same man who once called my decision stupid was now asking me to pay for his daughter's failure. I told them to leave the office because I had work to do, and they backed off, saying they'd let me think about it. That weekend, Jessica called me, the first time I'd heard her voice in 3 years. She didn't directly ask for money, but she talked about the stress of the debt and how she couldn't get a job without a degree. I asked her directly, "Why were you expelled from med school?" Jessica sighed and said everything had started falling apart 2 years earlier. The courses got harder, her grades kept slipping, and she couldn't bring herself to tell our parents. She tried to catch up, but the more she tried, the deeper she sank. In her final semester, she panicked and cheated on a pathology exam. She got caught on the spot, faced a disciplinary board, and was immediately expelled. She said she knew it was all over in that moment, but what crushed her the most was the thought of disappointing our parents. Then she said something that bothered me more than anything else. She told me our parents had calculated that with my current salary, I could afford to contribute $2,000 a month to help her get through this. As if I were some ATM obligated to salvage the dream they once forced onto me. I told her flatly that I wasn't going to pay her debt. Jessica went quiet for a moment, then started crying. She said she understood, but didn't know what else to do. She said our parents were angry and had barely spoken to her in weeks. I could hear the hopelessness in her voice. I asked if she wanted to meet, just the two of us, without our parents. She hesitated a bit, then said yes. We agreed to meet at a small cafe outside the city center. Jessica looked noticeably thinner, her eyes vacant, her movements drained of energy. She began to tell me in more detail what had happened after she was expelled. At first, our parents were planning to throw Jessica a big graduation party. They had already told all our relatives and friends that their daughter was about to become a doctor. When everything fell apart, they lied that Jessica was taking a year off for health reasons. But rumors spread faster than excuses. Some relatives discovered the truth and started asking questions. Our parents put all the blame on Jessica for tarnishing the family's honor and destroying the dream. Then Jessica told me something that truly shocked me. They had carefully planned for weeks before coming to see me. They rehearsed what to say, made plans, even wrote scripts to convince me. Jessica confessed that if I didn't agree to help, they were going to contact my colleagues to humiliate me. I stared at her and asked, "Why are you telling me all of this?" She answered with a choked voice, "I'm exhausted. I don't want to be part of their game anymore." I felt a bit of sympathy for Jessica, but deep down, I still didn't fully trust her. I decided to test her. After our meeting, I texted saying I was considering helping cover a small part of the debt, but only if we could meet with our parents together to discuss everything openly. Immediately, Jessica became flustered and said that maybe meeting them now wasn't a good idea. She said they were tense and unable to control their emotions. Then she suggested I should just transfer the money directly to her, so things wouldn't get complicated. I didn't say much else, just typed one short sentence, "So you really don't want me to meet them?" Jessica went silent for a while, then messaged back, "Just help me get through this, and I'll handle the rest myself." But I already had my answer. My sister was still playing her part in our parents' plan. I replied that I'd changed my mind and wouldn't be helping at all. Jessica instantly got angry, saying I was no different from them, that I only cared about myself and money. Then she hung up. 3 days later, my cousin Daniel called. He told me my parents had started contacting relatives to borrow money. They told everyone I had refused to help my sister, who was desperate under a mountain of debt. Daniel said some family members began siding with Jessica, believing she was in a critical state. They started calling me heartless, ungrateful, and said I didn't value family. A few even talked about pooling money together to help pay off Jessica's debt, though none of them could really afford it. Then Daniel told me something that made me decide I couldn't stay silent anymore. It turned out my parents had been living far beyond their means for a long time. They hadn't just taken out loans for Jessica's education, but also used that money to pay off credit card debt, renovate the house, and buy luxury items for themselves. They had bet everything on Jessica becoming a doctor, earning a high salary, and paying everything back. Every plan, every investment, every boast they made was pinned on a daughter who hadn't even graduated. And when that dream crumbled, they turned to me, the child they once cast aside, as their last lifeline. I knew I couldn't let them keep manipulating everyone. I wrote a long email and sent it to the entire extended family, explaining the whole truth, how Jessica was expelled for cheating, how our parents forced me to abandon my passion and only came back to me when their plans failed. I also warned that any money lent to them now would disappear into a bottomless pit. A day after sending the email, my uncle Frank, my dad's older brother, called. He thanked me for telling the truth, then revealed something that stunned me. He had loaned my parents, 2 years ago, and they hadn't repaid a single cent. He said he was starting to suspect he wasn't the only one. They had pleaded for money, claiming it was needed for medical bills, then said it was for fixing a storm-damaged roof. Now he wanted to find out who else in the family had been borrowed from without repayment. 3 days later, Uncle Frank called again, this time with a list of 8 other relatives who had also lent money to my parents. The total amount they had borrowed in the past 3 years was over 100. No one knew about the others because my parents always said, "Please don't tell anyone else, it's a private family matter." The relatives were furious, feeling betrayed and used. They decided they would confront my parents directly at the upcoming family gathering. I had no intention of attending. I didn't want anything to do with them anymore. The gathering happened that weekend. I only found out what happened through texts from Daniel. During the meal, someone stood up and asked bluntly, "When are you going to pay me back?" At first, my parents denied everything, but as more people stood up, listing the exact amounts and dates, they couldn't keep pretending. My dad started making excuses. "We planned to pay everyone back once Jessica graduated and had a stable job." That line was the last straw. Everyone knew Jessica would never become a doctor now. My mom broke down in tears, and my dad pulled her out of the gathering in heavy, awkward silence from everyone else. I thought that after being confronted by the whole family, my parents would finally stop with their outrageous schemes. But I overestimated them. The very next day, I received notice. They had filed a lawsuit against me. In the complaint, they claimed I owed them 50, an investment they said they made in me during my pre-med years. They even listed emotional damages for me dropping out and bringing shame on the family. I read it over and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I immediately met with a lawyer. After reading through the case, he chuckled and said, "There's no legal basis for this, but we'll still need to respond to the court." I nodded. This time, I wasn't going to back down. I provided all the documents proving that most of my tuition was paid through bank loans under my name, and I had paid them off myself. The total amount my parents had actually contributed was $7,500. I was ready to present this in court if needed. My lawyer advised preparing a countersuit if they continued to harass me. He said, "If they want war, then we'll show them the consequences of messing with someone who's done being silent." I agreed. The hearing took place a month later. My parents stood before the judge, their hands trembling as they held a folder of color-printed papers, including photos of me at work, my pay stubs, and design mock-ups I'd once shared online. They tried to convince the court that my success was built on the foundation they had provided, and that they deserved a share of it. It took the judge less than 10 minutes to dismiss the case. He said bluntly, "This is a misuse of the legal system to pressure another party." He then ordered them to pay all of my legal fees, nearly $6,000. I let out a deep breath as I stepped out of the courtroom, thinking it was finally over. But just outside, my father stopped me. He said, "How about we settle privately, just 20,000, and we'll drop everything?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I wasn't angry. I just felt pity. I reminded him that they had already lost the case, and had no grounds to demand anything. Then I added, "If you file another lawsuit, I'll countersue for harassment, and then I'll take even more than 20,000. I thought that warning would make them back off. But no, they hired a different lawyer and filed an appeal. This time, they added a new accusation, defamation of character, claiming that the email I had sent to the family had publicly embarrassed them in the community. While preparing for the appeal, I kept getting regular updates from Daniel. According to him, my parents were out of money and exploring other ways to survive. Jessica had even launched an online fundraiser to ask for help repaying her tuition debt. The fundraiser told a completely different story, that Jessica had been forced to drop out due to a sudden family crisis. No mention of the expulsion for cheating. In the first 2 weeks, the page received over 3,000, mostly from strangers. Then someone who knew the truth left a public comment. This girl was expelled for cheating on exams. The very next day, the fundraising page vanished without a trace. The whole thing fell apart like a poorly acted play. Some relatives started discussing the possibility of suing my parents to recover their money. They said if I could win, then they had legal grounds too. And they were done staying silent, because if they didn't act now, they might never see a single dollar again. I went into the appeal hearing determined to end it once and for all. My parents brought Jessica with them, probably to create the image of a broken-hearted family. But the judge only glanced through the file for less than 10 minutes before shaking his head. "This is a case of weaponizing the legal system for personal revenge," he said. He rejected the appeal and upheld the ruling for them to cover my legal costs. Not only that, he warned them that if they continued to file baseless claims, they could face a counter-lawsuit for civil harassment. I walked out of court again, but this time, I felt strangely calm. Outside, my father grabbed my arm. His eyes were no longer filled with rage, but fear. He quietly asked, "Are you really going to let this tear our family apart?" I didn't answer right away. A part of me wanted to say something harsh, but I held back. Finally, I said, "This family fell apart 6 years ago. Today is just the consequence." My lawyer later sent them the bill for nearly $6,000 in legal fees. My parents didn't have the money, so the amount began accruing interest. My lawyer told me that if they delayed too long, he'd hand the case over to a debt collection agency, and things would get aggressive. Meanwhile, Daniel kept me posted. The bank had begun warning them about defaulting on their mortgage. The house they had lived in for nearly 30 years was at risk of foreclosure. Jessica had gotten a part-time job at a grocery store. She was earning minimum wage, still living with our parents, and avoiding everyone in the family. No one admired her anymore, but no one berated her either, just an uncomfortable silence every time her name came up. She had become a symbol of a failed dream. Listening to Daniel, I didn't feel satisfaction. But I didn't feel pity either. I'd been pushed out of the family, then dragged back in as a last resort lifeline. Now, I was simply free. Sometimes, freedom, especially after years of being shackled, is more valuable than money. A week later, Daniel messaged me to say they had officially been forced to sell the house. They moved into a one-bedroom rental apartment, 3 people crammed together. My mother used to say, "Artists live miserable lives." Now the truth had flipped. Jessica decided to move out on her own a few weeks later. She rented a small room, took care of her own meals, and went to work regularly. She cut off contact with everyone, including me. Daniel told me Jessica had told our parents directly that she refused to take responsibility for any of the debts owed to the extended family. She didn't borrow, didn't sign anything, and never asked anyone to help. It was all their doing, all their lies. And our parents had no argument against that. When I heard that, I thought, at least she got out. Maybe she really did feel remorse, not for failing, but for being used as a tool to manipulate me. But I wasn't sure. I didn't want to be fooled again. I thought everything had finally come to an end, but then Daniel called me one more time. He said several members of the extended family had officially joined together to file a lawsuit against my parents. They wanted their money back, with interest, and this time, they weren't backing down. Not everyone joined in. Some felt pity and didn't want to kick someone when they're down, but the majority had run out of patience. They said if no one acted, my parents would just keep borrowing from others and finding excuses not to pay it back. They hired a lawyer to represent the entire group. The case file was meticulously prepared. Bank transfers, text messages, emails, all clearly showing a pattern of systematic fraud. Some even had recordings of past phone calls where my parents had promised to pay everything back as soon as Jessica graduates. I didn't join the lawsuit, but I didn't object either. I simply told Daniel, they need to learn how to face consequences like adults. He nodded and said that this time, no one was letting it slide. While the case was being prepared, my parents' financial situation collapsed. Their tiny rental apartment was crammed and falling apart. Debt piled up. Income was almost non-existent. People who once drank wine in their living room now avoided eye contact on the street. My lawyer sent another notice. If they didn't pay my legal fees within 30 days, a debt collection agency would take over. I didn't have to lift a finger. The gears of the legal system were already in motion. They had started the war. Now they'd have to face the aftermath on their own. Jessica was still working part-time, still avoiding me. She never apologized for what she did, but at least she wasn't enabling our parents anymore. I took that as a small sign of awakening, even if it came far too late. One time, I overheard my mom talking on the phone with someone. She said I had ruined this family, that if I had just helped out a little from the beginning, none of this would have gotten so bad. I didn't get angry. I just found it ironic. Even at the very end, she still didn't understand what had actually been broken from the start. They called me the traitor child. But if being a traitor means living honestly and refusing to be manipulated by guilt, then I'll wear that label proudly. 3 months later, the extended family's lawsuit came to a conclusion. My parents were ordered to pay a total of $125,000, including all loans, interest, and legal fees. To avoid jail time, they were forced to sell everything they had, including their wedding jewelry and the antique collection they used to boast about. Daniel told me that after selling the house, paying off their debts, and moving out of their old neighborhood, they had less than $2,000 left. They moved into an even smaller apartment, 1 bedroom, in a rougher part of town. From the people who once forced me to live up to the family name, they now couldn't even lift their heads in public. Jessica continued living alone, staying far away from them. She didn't help them repay the debts, and she never went back to visit. I think that was the right choice, because if you can't save yourself, the least you can do is not let others drag you down with them. I didn't reach out to them again, and they stopped contacting me too. Maybe out of fear of the law, maybe because they were just too tired. But deep down, I know, they still don't believe they did anything wrong. Sometimes, I think back to that dinner years ago, when I first mentioned applying to art school. If even one person had asked me, "Do you really love drawing?" maybe things would have turned out differently. But no one asked. No one listened. So I had to scream by walking away, by standing tall, by succeeding on my own terms. That's the price of freedom, and it's a price I would pay again, if I had to. Because at least I'm not trapped in a prison built from someone else's expectations. I don't hate them. I just no longer want to be part of their world. And if that makes me the bad child in their eyes, then I'll accept that title with pride. I don't live to repay a debt for being born. I live so I don't betray myself.